Focus on Headline. All right, let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. For this, joining us in the studio, we have our reporters in Hong Seung-yeon and Choi Ji-hee. Guys, welcome back.
Good evening.
Good evening to you guys. We're going to start things off with news out of North Korea. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, usually known for harsh rhetorics, kind of a soft-toned message this time, only it's not about South Korea. It's about Japan. She says Pyongyang is open to softening its relations with Tokyo, including inviting Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida to Pyongyang. Now, this is quite a rare offer of diplomatic discussions here, given the way that South Korea, the U.S., and Japan have been close in their military drills recently. And also with South Korea recently forging diplomatic ties with North Korea's longtime ally in Cuba. Nevertheless, let's get the latest on Kim Yo-jong's remark. Seung-yeon, you have more on this.
Sure. Kim Yo-jong, the sister of North Korea's leader, expressed optimistic intentions regarding improving ties with Japan, a day after South Korea forged diplomatic ties with Cuba. And according to the regime's state-run Korean Central News Agency on Thursday, Kim said that Pyongyang and Tokyo can open a new future together if Japan makes a political decision to improve relations. So the remarks came after Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida last week said that he feels a strong need to exchange the current relations between the two sides and that related activities are currently taking place. So Kishida had also expressed a desire to meet with Kim Jong-un last May. And Kim Yo-jong added that Kishida's visit to North Korea might happen on the condition that Japan is willing to leave the past abduction of Japanese citizens off the table. And relations between Pyongyang and Tokyo have long been sour as Japan claims that 17 of its citizens were abducted by North Korea in the 70s and 80s, and that 12 still remain in the north. Now, North Korea argues that the issue has already been settled, saying that 8 have died and the remaining 4 were never kidnapped. And experts say the remarks could be intended to counter South Korea's recent establishment of diplomatic ties with Cuba, a longtime ally of North Korea. And seeking cooperation with Japan could provide North Korea with a breakthrough as its diplomatic isolation in the international community is becoming increasingly severe. Kim Yo-jong, however, stressed that her remarks were solely her personal opinion. She added that the regime's leadership still has no plans to repair relations with Japan, and that it remains to be seen that Kishida's intentions are in the future.
Yeah, so if you guys remember, not too long ago, earlier this year, when there was the devastating earthquake over at Noto Prefecture over in Japan, one of the rare things that we saw was Kim Jong-un sending a letter of condolence to Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. And I believe the terminology that he used was something like, was it prime? He used, I believe, the formal title, right? Like Prime Minister and stuff like that. And it was like condolences, dear so-and-so. And it was very formal. And they thought it was really weird that, despite, again, South Korea, Japan, the United States forming this alliance, including a military alliance over the past year or so, that North Korea would send something like that to Japan. But it's a lot of pundits were kind of saying it was North Korea's sort of way to break up this alliance as best as they can. And they're not going to be sending a letter to South Korea. They're not going to be sending a letter to the United States. Japan was the best bet. And so even with the recent news that South Korea and Cuba formed this bilateral tie, now they're going, well, you know what? We'll just be all cool with Japan. And Japan, despite the fact that they're really, really close with the United States, will have this relationship. We'll have diplomatic talks with them. And so that's what many of the pundits are saying. But the big thing here is that Japan wants to talk about the abduction issue. North Korea doesn't. So now let's take a look at Japan's response to North Korea's stance in hoping to improve ties with Japan. You had Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi making a few comments referring to Kim Yo-jong's recent remarks. Ji, you have more on this.
Right. So Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi said Friday that he takes note of the recent remarks made by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's sister, pointing to the openness to mending ties and discussing the possibility of Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida visiting North Korea. Now, Hayashi told the press conference on high-level talks directly under Kishida for realizing a Japan-North Korea summit that the Japanese government has been constantly approaching North Korea about the potential bilateral summit through various channels to resolve pending issues with Pyongyang. But he added that he'd like to refrain from revealing details, including Japan's assessment of Kim Yo-jong's statement, as doing so may affect future negotiations. Now, meanwhile, the top Japanese government spokesman at the same conference reiterated Tokyo's stance of rejecting North Korea's claim that the issue of the reclusive country's abductions of Japanese nationals decades ago has been resolved. And Hayashi said that the North Korean claim is utterly unacceptable and that Japan remains unchanged in the intention to comprehensively resolve pending issues such as nuclear and missiles and, of course, abductions. Now, in 2022, Japan and North Korea signed a landmark declaration committing them to an early normalization of bilateral ties. Now, the signing came with the first historic visit to the North by the then Japanese Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi in the same year, and this led to North Korea returning 5 Japanese abductees home. And as Seung-yeon mentioned, Japan claims that North Korea abducted 17 Japanese citizens in the 1970s and 1980s, and 12 of them are still in the North after the North returned the 5 abductees. The North has admitted having abducted 13 Japanese nationals in the past to train its spies in Japanese language and culture, while returning the 5, North Korea claimed that the other 8 were deceased.
Yeah, just a quick correction here, because the former Japanese Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi visited North Korea in 2002. Was what it was.
Excuse me, 2002.
Yeah, and then the landmark agreement was back in 2002, which is interesting because back in 2002 was around the time after, was it 2000 was when Kim Dae-jung and then North Korean leader Kim Jong-il had sort of had their first inter-Korean summit, and then I believe Putin later on went to North Korea, and all these, diplomatic talks taking place in North Korea, because at that time from 2000 to 2003-4 was probably one of the more peaceful times around the world when it comes to North Korea related issues. But we're going to have to keep a close tab on this, and also what might be the response from both Seoul and Washington in regards to this. And you could kind of understand that Tokyo is not really kind of accepting this with open arms, right, just yet. And I think they are being diplomatically cautious in what they say in regards to Kim Yo-jong's remarks. But nevertheless, let's talk about, speaking of which, how Seoul and Washington reacted to this latest news. Seung-yeon, you have more on this.
Sure. The Korean Foreign Ministry official responded to Kim Yo-jong's statement on North Korea and Japan relations by stating that the government is in close communication with North Korea, Japan, and the United States. So the Unification Ministry stressed that North's engagement with Japan should be done in a way that contributes to North Korean denuclearization to promote peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. Meanwhile, Kim In-ae, deputy spokesperson for the Ministry of Unification, also stated during a regular briefing that the government is attentively following the recent ties between Japan and North Korea and are in close communication with South Korea, the United States, and Japan. The U.S. State Department, on the other hand, reaffirmed the need of engaging in discussion with North Korea. The State Department spokesperson stated that the U.S. has been very clear about the need of conversation and diplomacy with the DPRK. But when Korean media contacted the State Department, they suggested that we contact the Japanese government regarding reports of diplomatic engagement between Japan and the DPRK.
Again, usually with things like this, it does... Although it doesn't seem too fair, it does require some consultation with the United States, as we've seen with South Korea's talks with North Korea. Let's stay with North Korea-related issues here, because North Korea called for loyalty towards its leader, Kim Jong-un, as the state marked the 82nd birthday of Kim's late father and former leader Kim Jong-il this Friday. And again, it's interesting because, again, Kim Jong-il has passed away. It's been over a decade, yet they do still celebrate their birthday. And it's actually a major holiday over in North Korea. G, you have more on this.
Right. So in an editorial, the Rodong-sinmun, the North's leading newspaper, lauded the late leader as a patriot who established the foundation for national dignity and prosperity and said the current leader had inherited such feats. Now, this same newspaper claimed that the country achieved miraculous achievements and growth in areas, this including military, economy, and culture, all thanks to Kim, and called for the public to uphold his orders for national development. North Korea has been setting a festive mood ahead of the anniversary, which the country celebrates as one of its most important holidays, alongside the birthday of Kim's grandfather and national founder Kim Il-sung. And the Korean Central News Agency reported Friday that celebratory events were held in Laos, Myanmar, Pakistan, and Switzerland earlier this month to mark the late leader's birthday as well. And at the same time, flower baskets from overseas were laid in front of the statues of the former leaders in Pyongyang. Meanwhile, Radio Free Asia reported that a satellite image revealed large crowds gathering in Kim Il-sung Square in Pyongyang in square dot-shaped formations, this suggesting they were preparing for events related to the birthday of Kim Jong-il. And RFA explained that such images were caught in the eastern medium airfield area as well, suggesting, based on lights detected during the nighttime, that the military was practicing at night as well for the upcoming festivity.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about this particular holiday, so to speak. Chung Chul on North Korea now explained that on birthdays of Kim Jong-il and also Kim Il-sung, it's major, like it's the biggest holiday in all of North Korea. And so a lot of North Koreans actually look forward to these days because the government gives out rice and stuff. I don't know if they're able to do it this time around, but even if you go to schools, kids are given candy, for instance, right? So like it's a propaganda scheme. But it's interesting how the newspaper basically credited Kim Jong-il for the military economy and culture because a lot of people are saying, pundits were saying it is because of Kim Jong-il's military stance and his goals to be a nuclear state is what ultimately led to the downfall of North Korea and why many people still starve today. Let's move on to some domestic news this time. President Yoon Suk-yeol said on Friday that the government will provide stipends to graduate students in science and engineering, not to mention broaden the scope of scholarships to both undergraduate and graduate schools in science. Sung-yeol, let's get more on this.
Sure. President Yoon Suk-yeol unveiled the idea during a government public debate in Daejeon as part of its commitment to increasing the country's scientific and technological competitiveness by developing new talent in the field. This debate drew approximately 50 members of the public, including researchers, graduate students, business circle, and relevant government officials. So full-time graduate students in science and engineering who participate in state research and development projects will receive stipends, with master's degree students receiving a minimum of 800,000 won or $600 per month, and the PhD students receiving a minimum of 1.1 million won. And Yoon also stated that the total size of government scholarships will be increased by 130 billion won this year, so that presidential science scholarships, which have previously only been offered to undergraduate students, can now be awarded to graduate students, resulting in each person receiving an average of 25 million won per year. Now, the debate was a series of sessions addressing people's livelihood concerns, and previous debates have addressed topics ranging from transportation and housing to medical reform and digital policy. Also, Yoon stated on Friday that he intends to build Daejeon into a city worthy of its role as a scientific capital by boosting connectivity and driving urban development. So Yoon specifically stated that during his term, he will try to make noticeable progress on building the city's railroads underground and establishing an express train service connecting Daejeon to the surrounding cities of Sejong and Cheongju. And Yoon hopes the new train service will assist Daejeon collaborate with Sejong's administrative tasks as well as Cheongju's bio and semiconductor industries.
Yeah, and there's a reason why he sort of targeted the science and engineering students, both the graduate and undergraduate schools, because I believe later in the day, President Yoon made a visit to the graduation ceremony of KAIST, which is obviously one of the most illustrious, most prestigious, I should say, universities in all of Korea. And they're known for basically science and technology, right? Big news over the past few weeks now. It's this clash between the medical community and the government. We know the trainee doctors, collectively, as they're known. We're talking about the interns and residents of 5 major general hospitals. They're known as the Big 5 hospitals here in Seoul. Decided to submit their letter of resignation as a group. This on Monday. This is going to come on Monday next week in a move that would certainly intensify their strike threat over the government's plan to increase the number of medical students come 2025. Chi, let's get the details of this.
Sure. So that's about 20% of South Korea's trainee doctors saying earlier today they would resign effective on Tuesday to protest a government plan to admit more students to medical schools, saying this would hurt the national health insurance scheme. Now, the head of the Korea Interns and Residents Association said in a statement that representatives of the trainees who work at the country's 5 biggest hospitals, all in Seoul, have decided to leave their posts next week. Now, media reports estimated that the move would involve about 2,700 doctors, which is a fifth of the country's medical interns and resident doctors. And the system relies on them for emergency and acute health care. So there are concerns being raised about how the action could affect hospitals. And the government said any collective action by doctors is illegal and will respond firmly to strikes or refusals to work. And it vowed to go ahead with the plan to increase doctors, which polls show has strong public support. And regarding this, Vice Health Minister Bang Min-soo said the health ministry has ordered all teaching hospitals to disregard resignations submitted by doctors, and those who do not comply with the back-to-work order will be punished under medical services law. Now, doctors and medical students argue that the government's plan would encourage unnecessary medical care by increasing the number of doctors and making care more accessible. And their claim is that this would worsen the finances of the national health insurance plan as well. And also, last night at 9 p.m. local time, student body representatives of 35 medical schools out of 40 in the country held an emergency meeting and decided to submit resignations as well on the 20th.
Yeah, and so again, what's going to happen is that come next Monday is when all the residents and interns of the Big 5 hospitals are going to hand it in. But once they hand it in, it doesn't mean that they have officially resigned by then. It is after 6 a.m. Tuesday.
Right.
That the resignation letter is apparently supposed to go in effect. But again, the big thing here is, usually what happens is I've never been a full-time worker in my life, and so I've never had to hand in a resignation letter or anything like that. But the company basically has to accept it, right, and then file it and say, okay, you're good to go and you can resign. And what basically the government is calling on all the hospitals to do is to reject it. Technically, I guess you can. I don't know what kind of backlash would be met if they do reject it. And so we're looking at a lot of back and forth going on. We did hear the health ministry saying yesterday that despite the threats from the medical community that they're not going to go with the strike. And so I think that really upset the interns and residents even more. The health ministry, like I mentioned, ordering 221 training hospitals on Friday to prohibit this mass leave and maintain essential medical personnel, as again they've decided that they're going to all hand in these resignation letters by Monday and quit by next Tuesday. But again, word on the street is word. The reports say that some other medical hospitals are seeing their interns and residents potentially resigning from their post as well. Singyan, let's get more on this.
Sure, doctors have warned a big strike and other actions in response to the government's decision last week to increase the country's medical school enrollment limit by 2,000 seats next year, which is a significant increase from the present 3,058 seats. So according to the union, the trainee doctors at the 5 hospitals have chosen to strike at 6 a.m. next Tuesday. And the 5 hospitals are also called the Big Five. So the major 5 hospitals are Asan Medical Center, Samsung Medical Center, Yonsei Severance Hospital, Seoul National University Hospital, and Seoul St. Mary's Hospital. Also, according to the ministry, more than 150 doctors from 7 other hospitals, including Wongang University Hospital, Kacheng University Guild Medical Center, and Korea University Kudo Hospital, had also submitted resignation letters by Thursday night, midnight. Now, the order from the health ministry came hours after trainee doctors from 5 major general hospitals in Seoul agreed to resign collectively on Monday, intensifying their strike warning over the government's plan. So the order or the legal action that the Ministry of Health and Welfare is referring to is under the Medical Service Act. If a medical group refuses to provide medical treatment, they can be ordered to start working. And if they do not comply, they can face not only a 1-year suspension of qualifications, but also up to 3 years in prison. In particular, the amended medical law permits a doctor's license to be revoked if a person is sentenced to imprisonment, a suspended term, or both for any offense. Now, Second Vice Health Minister Bang Min-soo stated to reporters that the administration will protect the lives and health of the people by mobilizing all necessary resources. Park also said, reiterating the government's promise to take strong measures against any collective action by doctors that jeopardizes patient safety, that the government will unwaveringly accomplish medical reform.
So I don't know how this is going to work legally, because I think both sides kind of have 2 different points here, because the government is saying that it is illegal if any medical personnel refuses treatment, right? Which is true. It's true. You can't refuse treatment. But this is the reason why there's a difference between a strike and a collective action, right? Collective action is basically, what they're going to do together, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a strike. It could be a protest. It could be resigning en masse. If they strike, that means they're refusing to work and they're walking out, which is what, walk out, right? They're not going to work. They're just going to protest. That could be potentially illegal, because then if you're walking out, then you are refusing any kind of treatment. But if you're quitting, there is no rules as to you can't quit, right? If it's illegal to quit, that means any other doctor who hands in their resignation letter and says, I don't want to work in this hospital because I got a nice little offer from another hospital, I don't see how that could be illegal. So they're going to go back and forth, fight this. I think this could be a legal issue moving forward. And I don't know who's going to come on top with this, but we all know the victims of this are going to be the patients who might have to deal with all of this. Moving on, South Korea's export of ICT products jumped around 25% in January this year, year on year, mainly backed by the recovery in global chip demand. Let's get the latest figures on this.
Sure. So based on data compiled by the Ministry of Science and ICT, the outbound shipments of ICT products in the previous month amounted to $16.4 billion US dollars, which is an increase from $13.1 billion in the same period last year. Now, this marks the 3rd consecutive month of year-on-year growth and the first double-digit increase since May 2022. Now, during the month of December, the ICT imports of the country decreased by 3.2% compared to the previous year, resulting in a trade surplus of $4.5 billion in the sector. However, in January, chip exports witnessed a significant increase of 53% on year, reaching $9.4 billion. And this surge in chip exports was mainly driven by the sales of memory chips, which experienced a sharp increase of 90.5%. And remarkably, this marks the 3rd consecutive month in which the chip export figures have posted a double-digit increase. Now, according to the ministry, the recovery in the market is due to the rise in the average quarterly price of 8 gigabit DRAM for the fourth consecutive month. And this is a positive change since the price had been decreasing since the third quarter of 2021. And also, overseas sales of displays have increased by 2.6% to $1.5 billion, which also marks the sixth consecutive month of growth. And this trend is attributed to the increased demand for panels for televisions and laptops. And exports of computers and communications equipment also increased 33.6% and 27.6% to $840 million and $200 million respectively. But then outbound shipments of mobile phones retreated 20.1% to $1.1 billion. And according to the latest figures, if we take a look at them by country, combined shipments to China and Hong Kong have increased by 43.1%. And this is a third consecutive month of growth. And exports to Vietnam rose by 11.6%. This due to higher demand for semiconductors and cell phones in the country. And to the United States, there was a boost of 4.9%. This largely driven by stronger demand for semiconductors and computers. And exports to European Union and Japan increased by 1.9 and 1.5% respectively.
Again, we have to take a look at the figures a little bit closely. It could be a base effect, right, considering last year was so poor. But I think it's really crucial that we see a rebound in the export figures because there was some statistics that came out, not really mentioned a whole lot, but apparently recently South Korea's export figures has been as low as, if not worse than what it was back in the IMF times in the late 90s, is what they're saying, which is why one of the things we talked about briefly when it comes to the GDP. South Korea is now 13th largest GDP in the world, where we used to be 9th or 10th, used to go back and forth. And so considering the fact that we're largely export-driven, rebound in those figures should be good news for our country here. Also, according to Statistics Korea, South Korea adding more than 300,000 jobs in the month of January. This is for the first time in 3 months, as employment in the manufacturing sector went up for the second month in a row. So, yeah, let's get more on this.
Sure. So according to Statistics Korea, the number of the employed reached 27.74 million last month, rising 380,000 from the previous year. And it's the first time in 3 months that the country has gained more than 300,000 jobs, as the monthly tally decreased to 277,000 in November from 346,000 the previous month, with 285,000 added in December. Now, January also saw the biggest on-year job growth since March 2023, when the country added 469,000 positions, and hiring has increased on a monthly basis for the third month running. The employment rate among those aged 15 to 64 increased 0.9 percentage point on year to 68.7% last month, the best for any January since the Statistics Agency began collecting such data from 1989. However, the unemployment rate rose to 3.7% last month, up 0.1 percentage point from a year ago, and it was the highest level since January 2022. And last month, the number of unemployed rose by 48,000 year to 1.07 million, marking the third consecutive increase. So senior citizens accounted for the majority of January's job gains. So jobs for people over the age of 60 increased by 350,000 over the past year. And those in their 30s and 50s had 85,000 and 71,000 additional jobs, respectively. However, the number of jobs for people aged 15 to 29 fell by 85,000, and people in their 40s also lost 42,000 jobs last month. Looking at by sector, the manufacturing sector added 20,000 jobs in January, marking the second monthly growth. And the medical and social welfare welfare service segment created 104,000 new employment, while the science and technology service sector added 73,000. And the construction industry added 73,000 new employment. However, the real estate and education service sectors created fewer employment in January.
So it's really important to break down the numbers, because if you hear that the job growth reached a positive, right, 380,000 more jobs were added in the past year, it sounds really, really good. But when you say that of the 380,000, 350,000 were jobs for people over the age of 60, these are part-time jobs. All right, these aren't, and then you look at the number of jobs for people, the big ages, right, the 15 to 29, the 40s, who are basically at their peak of basically the forefront of the country's economy, losing all the jobs here, massive jobs here. Doesn't really look too good right now. Some other negative figures to look at here. South Korea's national tax revenue, as we've been knowing, have been seeing some deficits over the past few years now, fell nearly 52 trillion won last year. The budget deficit reaching 65 trillion won as of November last year. Let's get the figures on this.
Right. So according to the February issue of Fiscal Trends published by the Ministry of Economy and Finance, national tax revenue reached 344.1 trillion won last year. This is down 51.9 trillion won from a year earlier. Now, income tax fell by 12.9 trillion won due to a decline in land and housing transactions, and corporate tax fell by 23.2 trillion won. And non-tax revenues totaled 28.5 trillion last year. This is down 2.3 trillion won from the previous year. And the total revenue, which includes national tax revenue and non-tax revenue and fund revenue, totaled 52.9 trillion won from January to November last year. And this is down 42.4 trillion won from the same period a year earlier. Now, during the same period, total expenditures were recorded at 548.6 trillion won. This is also down 73.8 trillion from the same period a year earlier. And so as expenditure outpaced revenue, the cumulative integrated fiscal balance showed a deficit of 19.5 trillion won in November last year. Now, the administrative fiscal balance, which shows the government's actual fiscal position by subtracting the balance of the four guaranteed funds, including the National Pension Service, from the consolidated fiscal balance, was 64.9 trillion won in deficit.
This is, I think, one of those things that we talked about with Professor Yang Jun-seok when we're talking about the deficit and the tax revenues. And one of the big concerns that was raised is when it comes to the taxing of the stocks, right? They're raising the limits on this. And so by raising it, I mean, sure, it brings in more people to maybe invest in domestic stocks, but also you're not getting a lot of the tax that could come in. And of course, there's been other tax cuts here. How much longer we can go, we'll have to see. The big news over the past week or so has been the controversy surrounding the national team. We're talking about the national football team. We knew that it's been just over a week now. I think it was February 7th when they lost to Jordan in the semifinals of the AFC Asian Cup. Things didn't look really good with the match. After the match, there was calls for head coach Jurgen Klinsmann to resign. That didn't happen, but what did happen was the KFA holding a meeting amongst its committee members on Thursday. They recommended that the KFA president Chung Mong-gyu fire Jurgen Klinsmann, and the announcement was made earlier today that Jurgen Klinsmann indeed now is the now former head coach of the South Korean national football team. Sing-yeon, let's get more on this.
Sure. The Korea Football Association informed Klinsmann of its intention to fire him after a 2.5-hour meeting between its president, Chung Mong-gyu, and other senior executives on Friday. So the move came after South Korea fell 2-0 to Jordan in the Asian Football Confederation Asian Cup semifinals in Qatar on February 6th, with President Chung in attendance. So South Korea's hopes of capturing their first AFC title since 1960 were dashed after a surprise loss against a team placed 64 spots below them. And Klinsmann immediately began receiving calls to resign in order to take responsibility for failing to lead his brilliant squad to success. His team included Tottenham Hotspur's Son Heung-min, Paris Saint-Germain's Lee Gang-in, and Bayern Munich's Kim Min-jae. So Klinsmann refused those demands, stating that he planned to evaluate and assess South Korea's performance in the Asian Cup with the KFA before beginning preparations for the World Cup qualifying matches in March. So under Klinsmann, South Korea won 8 games, drew 6, and lost 3.
So there was even a controversy even before the announcement of Klinsmann's firing was going to happen because, again, after that 2.5-hour meeting with the KFA executives and KFA President Chung Mong-gyu, that announcement happened in a press conference at the KFA house at around 2:40 p.m. today, but at around 1 p.m., Klinsmann went on his Instagram to say farewell, goodbye, thank you everybody for the support, and I had a great time in the 12 months or so, and I appreciate all your support, blah blah blah. Even before Chung Mong-gyu was able to make an announcement on his firing, and so which again, I mean, it's kind of messed up, but I believe there was also where is it? One of our listeners said, Hazelnut said, Klinsmann sacked, now KFA president fired too, please. Well, the reporter was asking whether or not he is going to resign from his post because, I mean, we know that there's been other controversies mired with the national team. But instead of saying that he is not going to resign, what he said was, he was not responsible or did not participate in the hiring process of Jurgen Klinsmann, is what he said. Basically saying it's not my fault that Jurgen Klinsmann did so poorly because I wasn't in the hiring process. But he also did kind of hint that he's not going to be running for a 4th term. Now, he's on his 3rd term now. He pulled some rule book things and said he might not, probably hinting at not running at a 4th term here. So a lot of controversy. Who's going to be leading the next national team? Chris certainly isn't. Despite playing football manager in the 90s, he says, I'll take the job, which reminds me of the news of a guy who plays fantasy football. He signed up for a job for this defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. He didn't get that. Anyways, guys, thank you very much for your reports. Have a safe weekend, and we'll see you guys again.
Thank you.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang radio application or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.